Let's start off by reading Psalm 146. Praise for God's help. Praise the Lord, O my soul. I will praise the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praises to my God all my life long. Do not put your trust in princes, in mortals, in whom there is no help. When their breath departs, they return to the earth. On that very day, their plans perish. Happy are those whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God, who made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, who keeps faith forever, who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets the prisoners free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the strangers. He upholds the orphan and the widow, but the way of the wicked he brings to ruin. The Lord will reign forever, your God, O Zion, for all generations. Praise the Lord. As we light this candle, O Lord, we ask you to set our hearts on fire with love for you. May this flame, which represents your love, power, and nature, burn bright in us and shine through us so that our neighbours and the world may know the wonder of your love. As we celebrate We Are Church's birthday, we pray the same, that the flame of We Are Church, that represents your love, power, and nature, burns bright in us as a church and shines through us so that all of our neighbours and the world may know the wonder of your love. May the light of your word live in us and always kindle our desire to walk with you, serve you, and to be a witness for you. We light this candle to glorify your holy name. Amen.
As Julia prayed, we don't really have an official birth date, but it was kind of in July of 2021 that we created a little WhatsApp group and met online because we were still in the middle of COVID. And then we decided to get together in the park, and it was September 2021. So yes, we do give God thanks, and we've come a long way in so many ways, right? And yet we remain the same. We just remain a very casual space to meet together and to find fellowship and community as a group of people who just want to follow the ways of Jesus. And it's really that simple. It's not a whole bunch complicated. Okay.
I'm reading from Mark 7, verse 24. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." And when she went home, she found the child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment of his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers on his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one. But the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak."
If you know me at all, then you will know that I seldom have no words. Well, after reading these two stories, which are today's gospel lectionary reading, I encountered one of those times. Ha 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 ha. What a strange thing Jesus was up to. And the author of Mark putting these two stories together like this mind blown, but not to worry, I've had a week or so to think about it and I found some words. So I have been stretched this week, friends, and I pray as we consider these two miracles that you will be too. Some context: Jesus has been hanging around near the Sea of Galilee, and in our reading, he first heads up north to Tyre, where he heals the Syrophoenician woman's daughter, and then he goes a little further up to Sidon for what we're not told. Sidon was not en route to where Jesus then encounters the deaf and mute man. It's actually totally out of the way, because Jesus finds the deaf man beyond where he started, to the southeast of Galilee in the territory of the Decapolis. So I had to look at a map because I didn't do geography, but it's like he went a little bit all over the place. The Decapolis, 10 cities, all Greek in origin, were in league with each other from about the time the Roman general Pompey defeated Syria in 65 BC and had retained a strong Greek influence. While this route may appear odd, it's not entirely strange if we consider that one of the intentions of Mark's gospel is to start making the circle bigger, so to speak. So between Tyre, then Sidon, and the Decapolis, Mark really wants us to know that Jesus is traveling widely through Gentile areas, which he's not supposed to be doing, is he? Since he's the Jewish Messiah. So we're in the vicinity of Tyre, a city originally founded by the Phoenicians, when Jesus, not by choice, is forced into an encounter with a woman from the area, the Syrophoenician mother whose child is demon-possessed. In Matthew's gospel, she's called a Canaanite woman because before Israelite, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman occupation, this had been the land of the Canaanites. Jesus is trying to evade the crowds by hiding in a house, but his reputation has gone before him, even to the places of the Gentiles. So he is found by this desperate mother with whom he proceeds to have a very uncomfortable engagement. Matthew's version of events also highlights just how unwelcome the woman is. A Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." Have you ever conspired to keep someone out of your space, your group? Have you ever been the one deliberately shunned? What transpires next is fairly ugly, because Jesus essentially does indeed shun the woman. He tells her, You're not one of us. You are not one of this group of people I have been sent to help. He then doubles down on the exclusion by saying that the bread of God's children is not to be given to the dogs. And the dogs was a known racial slur used by Jews against Gentiles. What has just happened here? Has Jesus just dissed a Canaanite woman? Has he just discriminated against her and her people? Because that would mean that Jesus was being racist. We can try to save face for Jesus by offering different interpretations for the word dog. Yes, it's likely referring to like a household dog who was a pet. But really that's just an attempt to protect Jesus. And spoiler alert, Jesus doesn't need us to defend him. He's got this. Now, there are three ways that scholars and commentaries will interpret this story, and here they are. Firstly, Jesus is testing the mother's faith. This is kind of an outdated interpretation, and I'm not going to elaborate on it because I really don't believe that Jesus was punitive in this way, or that he played devil's advocate. Like, let's see how far I can push this desperate mother before she cracks. No, that doesn't wash with me. The second explanation suggests that Jesus is using this exchange as a lesson for his disciples. You see, if you're a Jewish disciple of a Jewish rabbi at this time, the Messiah has come for you and not for a Gentile. This woman is a problem in so many ways. She's associated with the Canaanites, the original enemy of Israel. She's Gentile, she's Greek. She's associated with the Romans by the region she's living in. She's a foreigner, she's female, her child is ill in a way that possibly makes her unclean. She approaches a man, an esteemed one at that, and in a very bold manner. And then she argues with him. She's a problem in so many ways. And the disciples really do have a lot to learn, which is precisely what they've committed themselves to do by being followers of Jesus and students at his school. They're on the path to understanding what God meant when God told Israel they were to be a light for all nations, that Jesus had come as a savior for all people, that God didn't belong to them, to Israel. He never did. That Jesus doesn't belong to them. He never did. Here's an example of a commentary that supports this view. The text can be understood as follows. Jesus is irritated by the disciples' attitudes regarding women and Gentiles. The woman's love for her daughter and her confidence in him impress Jesus. He decides to use the occasion to help her and challenge the deeply rooted prejudices in the hearts of his disciples. In the process, he gives the woman a chance to expose the depth of her courage and faith. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty condescending to me. So yes, the disciples do have much to learn, and they will learn from this. But I still don't think that's what's going on here. Because again, why would Jesus humiliate and reject an already traumatized woman for the sake of a lesson? So then there's this third interpretation, which is what I think is happening. And you might call me a heretic after this, but I don't mind. Been called it before. I think that Jesus gets it wrong. Martin Luther is one of the very few interpreters who flatly states that the woman wins this contest. She catches Christ with his own words, Luther writes. He compares her to a dog. She concedes it and asks nothing more than that he let her be a dog. Where will Christ now take refuge? He is caught. Guys, I really think that it's possible that Jesus is being schooled. Jesus enters into an engagement with this woman who is expected to respond. And no response would also be a response, if that makes sense. But the odds are against her. The disciples are antsy. The healer has stated his case, and it's not looking good for her. Understand, Jesus is not dismissing her like the disciples did. We know Jesus engages with women and foreign women all the time. But the Gentile thing is a thing here. And this brave woman, so desperate for her child to be well, takes a shot at being heard by Jesus. Even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. This is how she respectfully acknowledges Jewish priority, but argues for Gentile inclusion as well. First Jew and then Greek. She agrees, and then goes along with being called a dog who deserves only the crumbs that fall from the children's hands at the table onto the floor. But she does something else, and I found this weirdly exciting. Shouldn't have told you that. The word here that Jesus uses for children is teknon, when he says the children's food is not for the dogs. And this word refers to biological children as descended by birth from their natural parents. He's referring to the biological children of Israel. The word the desperate mother uses for her children in her response is paidion, which refers to any young child. She gently suggests an opening of the closed circle to be more than just of family. She extends it to the children of the household, such as those of the slaves, of other households, and maybe even of the households of foreigners. And Jesus is convinced, and her daughter is healed. If we ever needed evidence of the full humanity of Jesus, well, here it is. He responds to the needs of another with anger and resentment. He goes so far as to dehumanize her. He's tired and he's cranky, we get it. He's got multitudes of his own people to deal with, and now he must meet the needs of the offensive foreigners as well. Jesus has a very clear sense of his mission, to minister to his people, and now he needs to consider doing something quite unthinkable. He must question his own stance, open his mind, broaden his horizons, and make a decision that will leave him unpopular in the eyes of many of his people, and then many of the people that are not his. And no, I don't think this makes Jesus less. I think it makes him more. We are told when Jesus is a child that he grew in wisdom and stature. Why should he not keep developing? When Jesus considers the unthinkable, he grows through his preconceived biases, and then he does change his mind. This is a humble and courageous act, and I think this very human moment exposes Jesus as vulnerable, teachable, and very real. I do think something of what we struggle with here is in that the Jesus that throws miracles and healing out freely and strides around with an authoritative word on his divine mission is a way easier Jesus for us to manage. Because this Jesus, kind of like a superhero, makes our lives easier in that he's an example. We look up to him and we strive to emulate him, but we kind of accept the impossibility of ourselves reaching such a goal, despite it being a truly noble goal. But the emotionally and mentally human Jesus, the one who walks around feeling pain, the one who is working out unhealthy doctrine in his mind, fluffing it up, but then making things right, allowing the sadness and injustice he sees to affect his heart, well, this Jesus is dangerous. Because this is the Jesus whose shoes we can walk in, whose example we have every possibility of learning from, who demands that we search ourselves so that we can open our hearts and our minds to think the unthinkable. And then do the unthinkable. Learn from the one we other. Realize they're not as other as we think, and then include them. Make space at the table and share the bread, because it's everyone's table and it's everyone's bread. It's dangerous too because those who think the unthinkable like Jesus did are almost always going the opposite way, against the flow, and they will end up rejected by the establishment, especially in the early days when the unthinkable is very new and strange. Once upon a time, it was unthinkable that the earth was round, and those suggesting it were persecuted. It was unthinkable that humans could fly, that women could vote and lead churches, that men could offer tender and loving care to their children, that black people could own land, that gay people could get married and be welcomed at church. The work of thinking the unthinkable also never ends. Let's use the example of race. So, we hear people saying, well, I'm not racist, I've got black friends, and they've even been to my house. But will you sit amongst the black people who are living in poverty? The same goes the other way around, and I know this as a personal bias, so I'm revealing something of myself, because when I see a white beggar, me, I just want to say to him, come on, buddy, you've got white privilege on your side. Maybe there's historical truth there, but that is not nice and it's not loving, Nicola, and it's very unhelpful. What does happen, though, is thinking the unthinkable becomes easier to do every time. As Jesus shows us, Jesus leaves his encounter with the Canaanite woman changed, and we see the impact that she's had on him, and the deaf and mute man becomes the first beneficiary of this growth. Now we're in the Decapolis, and our story tells of an interesting healing involving Jesus putting his fingers into the man's ears and grabbing his tongue, not sure if it's his own tongue or the man's tongue, and also their spit. Sounds worse than a gynae visit, sorry, or maybe a prostate exam, I don't know. But in fact, what is going on was strikingly personal, deeply intimate, and physical in a way that the previous healing was not. And then there is this groan. Most translations say sigh, but in its original form, the word is way more emotional. It's an emotional expression of distress, after which Jesus looks into heaven and speaks the word Ephphatha, be opened, which imbues the act with a sacramental earthiness. And as we've heard at this stage, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. The word Ephatha spoken like this is a command to be opened. And yes, it is part of the healing miracle. The man's ears are opened, but there is more to it. For the disciples and Jesus' other Jewish followers, there was this constant struggle to be good enough. All the rituals, all the cleansings, all the sacrifices, hang out with the correct people, wear the correct clothes and adornments, eat the correct food, which Jesus has just dealt with at the beginning of this chapter. And this really wasn't how God had intended things to be. And Christianity has become similar. Be baptized, then confirmed. Get your devotions done in the morning, prayer time, grace before meals, don't swear, sexual purity, learn the right key verses. I could go on and on. But what I'm trying to say is we really have a lot of conditions to meet prior to acceptance into a religion whose God created humanity as the crown of creation and declared them very good. So much stuff has to happen on our side for the kingdom of heaven to be open for us. And Jesus says, no. There's nothing you have to do. The kingdom is open. It is wide open. Understand, no declaration on our side can affect the kingdom. We can't make it open. Just like truth is already truth before we believe it. It is us that must open ourselves to heaven. It is us that must overcome the stuff that the world and religion outside has put on us and open ourselves to the blessing that is God and God's kingdom. And then, like Jesus has done in Tyre, we take this opening that is for us and know that it applies to every other person on earth. Because when we learn that we have to be a certain way for God to accept us, we also believe that others have to be a certain way. When a gatekeeper tells us that we can't come in, we internalize this message and we project it onto others. So there's an unlearning that we have to do, and we must embrace it, first for ourselves. And that very same unlearning must touch others too. And this, folk, is the opening. Sounds like a Stephen King book, The Shining. It's the opening. Jesus has just experienced it. He is freshly schooled. And now he's saying to his disciples, open your hearts and minds. My new community includes both Jews and Gentiles. But it is so hard because we like the walls and the gates and the fences and the borders and the boxes that we live in. We have come to believe these constructs are the fullness of life that Jesus wants for us, the abundance that he speaks of. But really, this neatly divided and ordered life is what Richard Rohr calls the scarcity model. This is precisely the model that includes some and excludes the rest, desires a homogeneous group, chosen, that deserves all the best, and then spends enormous amounts of energy hanging on to it all. Listen to what he says. As long as you operate inside any scarcity model, there will never be enough God or grace to go around. Jesus came to undo our notions of scarcity and tip us over into a worldview of absolute abundance, or what he would call the kingdom of God. The gospel reveals a divine world of infinity, a worldview of enough and more than enough. Our word for this, undeserved abundance, is grace. Give and there will be gifts for you, full measure, pressed down, shaken together and running over and poured into your lap. It is a major mental and heart conversion to move from a scarcity model to an abundance model. No gospel, he says, will ever be worthy of being called good news unless it is indeed a win-win worldview and good news for all people, without exception. The right to decide who is in and who is out is not one that our little minds and hearts can even imagine. Jesus' major theme of the reign of God is saying, only God can do such infinite imagining, so trust the divine mind. The different stages of faith models can really help us understand this whole opening, be opened, that we're discussing. A well-known older model was James Fowler's Stages of Faith, which has 6 stages. Brian McLaren has a 4-stage model, which Jane has spoken of before. Richard Rohr uses the 2 halves of life to describe this opening. Essentially, what these models tell us is that we begin our spiritual life with specific needs to help us navigate spirituality. They're not necessarily bad in that they keep us in the spiritual fold, but we need to move from milk being our sustenance to eating meat. So we require different skills as our faith develops and grows. James Fowler equates the early stages of our faith, sorry, my mouth ran away with me, to that of a toddler. Now, you may be at any age when this happens, but many of us would have started this journey as toddlers in our Christian homes. So when you're new to faith, it's likely pretty 2-year-old egotistical. And egotistical at 2 is very cute. But when you're 35, it ceases to be cute. It's the I'm a sinner and I need saving. If I don't, well, fires of hell. So I pray the sinner's prayer to ensure that I get into heaven, and then I start learning the Bible. I need the words to mean exactly what they say, because we teach toddlers and even adolescents solid, concrete ideas. We give them concrete facts to work with and to interpret their faith and the world. So we team this with an inerrant Bible, which it works really well for us here and into the next stages. And we have rules to guide us and to keep us on the right track. As we grow, our faith is still egocentric, but it opens to include our family, our congregation, our denomination. And the key word here is that we need to be dualistic in these stages. Dual, two, one on each side. We like and we need right and wrong, good and bad, safe and dangerous, friend, enemy, winner, loser, clean, dirty, success, failure, black, white. Gray areas freak us out. Richard Rohr says we continue to sort the world into these opposing categories for most of the first half of life. Dualism is the skill which helps us form a moral container for our lives. We also spend a lot of time and effort to accumulate material things, wealth, information, knowledge, all the things that we need to live our contained life and make it work well within the container. Brian McLaren's simplicity and complexity would be this first half of life. Some of the phrases and words he uses to describe this are obedient to authority, faithful to the authoritative tradition, a literal reading of scripture, part of the right group and the winning team, and then loyal to that group, achieving goals, being free and independent. Doubt is a failure and a weakness, also a betrayal, but it can be solved or cured. The supreme being is a protector, a lawgiver, a warrior, and a patriarch. Let me be clear. Authoritative religions and cults need us to stay at this stage our entire spiritual life. This works well for them. It keeps them powerful, ensures good numbers, and ensures good earnings. But all the time, life is happening. We're aging, we're experiencing hardships and suffering. We are learning that love hurts, and life sometimes does too. Increasingly, our concrete thoughts on life need to become more abstract, because now we're becoming aware of our mortality and our limitations. We're considering existential stuff, guys. And this is when dualism stops working for us. We need to learn new skills to navigate the gray areas. So, an example pertinent to our community: my child is gay. I've been brought up to believe that this is wrong. It goes against God's natural order, or whatever drivel they fed you. I made a note here not to roll my eyes. And my church has told me that I have a choice to make. So now I've got to enter a gray area. And after a huge amount of religious, spiritual, emotional trauma, I'm wading in these gray areas. But I get through them. And once through, they're actually no longer gray areas. Just like Jesus in his experience with the Canaanite woman, who arrives at the deaf Gentile man with no reservations. We basically reach the glass ceiling of the man-made religious structure that we have been taught. We notice teachings and laws that we were once told we must rigidly adhere to for the good of the church, and these laws are now suffocating people and reducing our great and almighty God to a puppet whose master is doctrine. We've realized the absurdity of selling a God of unconditional love, but we include words like predestination, sanctification, and hell in the terms of sale agreement. And our spirit has become paralyzed in this cage, and it is yearning for expansion because God, Creator, Son, and Spirit, they interact all the time in what Richard Rohr calls the cosmic dance of love. And inside of us, our spirit wants to be fluid and dynamic too, no longer contained, and thus incapacitated and impotent. A rigid structure can't hold something as big and dynamic as love. Moving on from dualism gives us a way better perspective on how we fit into the world, and we start to embrace paradox. We start investigating, seeking out these gray areas. We become less selfish and entitled. Fundamentalist ideas now start to bother us. They no longer sit well with our soul. I always think of Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman of Gift of the Givers. Really? We think that guy's not going to heaven because he's not Christian? McLaren calls this perplexity. We become critical and we ask questions, even of authority. We consider what is fair. We value authenticity and integrity, even if it reveals in ourselves and others something that is less than perfect. And eventually, we reach a stage where conflicting ideas are not a problem, but a part of life that we hold in tension. We see that grief and joy can coexist, as can good and bad, which in fact exist together within each one of us. And Jung calls this our shadow side. We are firmly rooted in the second half of life now, approaching McLaren's harmony, close to understanding something called oneness, which needs a whole sermon on its own. We are literally wide open at this stage, and here we understand there is a place for everyone. In contrast with this vast openness, now is a tiny ego, because our outlook has moved from one that revolves around ourselves to one that seeks the common good. McLaren also calls this harmony solidarity, and I really love that. With hearts broken open, we get to a religion that cultivates human flourishing for everyone. We've transcended the rigid boundary keeping, and now it needs to be abandoned once and for all. You can be sure that the pilgrimage taken to reach this place would have been extremely uncomfortable, painful, since this broadening of the heart and the mind to include the other is one of the most challenging psychological, mental, and emotional maneuvers there is. But with open hearts, raw and receptive, we see the injustice of a system that excludes, that others, and that isolates, that builds up only those who look and act like me and who conform. Perhaps it's my cooking background, but I've always been drawn to a table ministry, based on the relationship building, the healing, and the restoration that Jesus did at the table over a meal. The Highway Women have a song, Crowded Table, that brings this all together for me. Here's a verse in the chorus. I'm not going to sing it. No, you won't be saying that when I've sung it. If we want a garden, we're going to have to sow the seed. Plant a little happiness, let the roots run deep. If it's love that we give, then it's love that we reap. If we want a garden, we're going to have to sow the seed. The door is always open, your picture's on my wall. Everyone's a little broken, and everyone belongs. Yeah, I want a house with a crowded table and a place by the fire for everyone. Let us take on the world while we're young and able and bring us back together when the day is done. Very importantly, and I'm coming to the end, with all this opening comes something else, release, because now our hands are open and we're no longer holding on to all our things so tightly, physical and other. We're releasing hatred, anger, bitterness. Forgiveness comes more easily for us because our empathy is deepened. We cease to clench our fists around our possessions and our wealth, and we begin to share. We relinquish control. This is a surrendering, friends, a surrendering to God and a surrendering to love. And somewhere in the mind of this crazy thing I've spent 20 minutes trying to explain is the reason that we're included in the first place. Despite our humanity and humanity's inherent propensity for sin, God chose us. We belong to God, not the other way around, as does every other created being on the planet and wherever else there may be beings in our vast universe. Because this great, big, almighty God is synonymous with Ephata. God is so wide open, it's beyond comprehension. But if we were to name it, love would be a good word. A side note, these stages do not necessarily occur with our age in years. They're psychological, emotional stages, ages. I know 80-year-olds that are still toddlers on the faith scale and teenagers that are pushing Fowler's stage 5, young adults that are already in the second half of life spiritually. And you know why it's okay for us to go through these stages? Because Jesus did. I think there was a little bit of perplexity going on in his encounter with the Canaanite mother. Conversion was never just a once-off event. It is a process. Ephata. What a beautiful word. Let it rest upon you. Let's pray. Dear God, how do we sit here on a Sunday morning with the change of the seasons in the air and the plants on the plants and even within us, and think that you could fit into a box that we need you to fit into? You created the heavens and the earth and all that is in them, and we have the audacity to suggest that we could mold you to suit our needs of power and control, wealth and fortune, popularity, homogeneity. Lord, fill us with a spirit of oneness, of openness, so that we will truly know, feel the extent of your love for us, so that we will truly know and feel the extent of your love for others, so that we will truly know and feel the extent of your love for the creation, such that we will act in accordance with your loving will for it all. Amen.